We read this morning from Mark's Gospel. This is Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And Jesus was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Peter did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the Beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. If you are looking for a mountaintop experience, you're probably going to have to get yourself out of Florida. At 345 feet, Britton Hill up in Walton County is the highest elevation in all of Florida. If you want to summit Britton Hill, it's going to require a leisurely stroll of 30 to 45 minutes. You're not going to break a sweat. You're not going to get a blister. And you have 0 chance of getting altitude sickness. If you are looking for a mountaintop experience, you might have better luck flying to Hawaii. Mauna Kea is 14,000 feet, and you can drive all the way to the top. Now, at 14,000 feet, the air is quite thin. It's noticeable that there isn't enough oxygen. And you get a sense at that height of the horizon curving back around you. Not the curvature of the earth. You need to be quite a bit higher for that. But the appearance of the horizon curving back over towards you, and between the air and the visual effect, there really is a sense that that's one of those places where heaven and earth meet. Now, a mountaintop experience doesn't necessarily require a mountain. There are what people call thin places as well. A place like the Iona Spiritual Retreat in Scotland. A thin place being the place where he said that the boundary between heaven and earth is so thin as to be almost permeable, allowing for movement back and forth between spiritual realms. People talk about thin places in a variety of contexts, not just at spiritual locations, but also in spiritual occurrences or occasions. People who have survived near-death experiences talk about that permeability of the boundary between heaven and earth. And it is a privilege of the position of pastor to be present at deathbeds where we are observing and hearing people who are conversing, perhaps with those who have gone before. Our text for today is the definitive mountaintop experience. It's the mountaintop experience from which the term is derived. It didn't just seem like heaven and earth met on that mountaintop. It did. And it wasn't that the people who were there were suffering from lack of oxygen and thought they were having a spiritual experience. They actually did have an encounter with the divine. And the question may be percolating up in our minds as we think about, why was it that Jesus took his disciples to that mountaintop? Why reveal his divine nature then and there to those disciples? Well, Mark is notoriously skimpy on details, but he gives us a hint. Our gospel writer gives us a hint here as we read that it was 6 days later. So something must have happened 6 days earlier for Mark to begin with a description of something that happened 6 days later. And so we go back and we find indeed that there was a conversation. Jesus asking his disciples, well, who do you think that I am? Some of them saying John the Baptist, or Elijah, or another prophet. Peter suggests, you are Messiah, you are the Christ. And Jesus nods and begins to tell his disciples about the path that lies ahead for him as Messiah, a future that includes suffering and death and resurrection. And Peter at this point is saying, that's not what I had in mind. Peter rebukes Jesus for talking in those terms, and Jesus rebukes Peter for rebuking Jesus. And then goes on, Jesus goes on to say that, well, if you want to be my disciple, then you need to pick up your own cross and follow with me on this same path. So perhaps the disciples were confused by that conversation, not sure what to make of the idea or the notion of Messiah being put to death by the people that the Messiah came to save. That doesn't make any sense. And how could he save them if he was dead? Maybe they were afraid. Maybe the disciples were afraid as they thought about that conversation and saying, like, this is not what I signed up for. Or maybe there wasn't any reaction at all. What they heard from Jesus just didn't register. It went in one ear and out the other. They didn't really listen to what Jesus had told them. And so we read in verse 2, 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. Whether it was because the disciples were confused, or they were afraid, or they just had no reaction at all, Jesus takes them up that mountain so that Jesus' identity can be revealed to them and his authority confirmed. Jesus was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could make them. If there was any question about who Jesus was, it was put to rest. God's divine glory revealed in Jesus, the disciples given just a small glimpse, just a smidge of that glory, to see for themselves. Jesus is Son of God. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And is there anyone else in the room who would like to know what Jesus and Elijah and Moses were chatting about at the water cooler up there on top of the Mount of Transfiguration? Thanks for coming out. What were they talking about up there? Moses, to whom the law had been handed down. Elijah, the greatest of the prophets. Jesus, revealed to be greater than either of them, greater than the law, greater than the prophets. Jesus, the satisfaction of the demands of the law. Jesus, the very fulfillment of the promises of the prophets. Jesus, the Messiah. God sent his own Son to be our Savior. That's it. That's the mic drop. And yet the disciples didn't get it. Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let's make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Peter did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Jesus was transfigured on that mountaintop, revealed to be who he had always been, revealed to be God's Son and Messiah, the Savior, but not transformed by it, just revealed. The disciples, on the other hand, revealed also for who they had always been, usually pretty scared, and usually pretty befuddled and confused. But, however, they are also transformed by their experience. Jesus revealed the disciples also transformed or changed by what they saw. Somewhat, not exactly, but you could use the analogy if I'm to do a spoiler for you, for those of you that have not yet seen Star Wars. Spoiler alert. When Darth Vader says, Luke, I am your father, right? We're familiar with that. Well, Darth Vader had always been Luke's father, but now revealed to Luke with great cinematic effect. And Luke is the one who's changed by that revelation, right? Luke, the one who has a new sense of purpose, a new path, a new destiny that is laid out for him that he seizes and moves forward on. The Mount of Transfiguration is a pivot point in Jesus' ministry. Jesus now begins the journey to the cross. The disciples, still struggling to understand that that path of salvation leads through suffering and death and resurrection, nevertheless accept the invitation to join Jesus on the path. They journey with Jesus. Now we shouldn't be surprised that they were terrified by what had been revealed to them on the Mount of Transfiguration. They were terrified. All the gospel writers record the same. This was an extraordinary event. It was been overwhelmed by it. Nor should we be surprised that they wanted to stay on the mountain. Peter, let's pitch some tents. Let's stay. They were terrified, but they were also exhilarated by what they had seen. They wanted to stay in the moment where things were real and clear and purposeful. We understand that. Maybe to a lesser degree, we go on a mission trip, we go to a spiritual retreat or some kind of a revival. And when we want to stay also, don't we? We don't want to go back to our ordinary lives. We want to stay in that moment where things feel close to God. But we can't, because we're not called to live on the mountain. Jesus called his disciples then and still calls us today to live life in the valley. To live and minister in the low places as witnesses to the hope of the gospel. ministering out of our own brokenness and our own woundedness and our own lowliness to those who are also, like us, broken and wounded and living in the low places. Because it's in our humbleness, it's in our humility, it's in our loneliness when we most magnify God and God's glory. Cloud overshadowed them. From the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the Beloved. Listen to him." We recall at Jesus' baptism, God spoke to Jesus. "You are my Son. In you I am well pleased." And now here at the Transfiguration, the divine relationship revealed and the divine authority confirmed for the disciples. He is my Son. You listen to him. Listen to him. Comes from the akuo in the Greek, which is the same root from which we get the word acoustics. Hearing, a kind of hearing which requires more than just sound passing through the empty place between our ears. It implies a kind of action. Listen to him. Akueto. The verb tense that implies continuing action. Keep on hearing and listening. Keep on acting. Keep on following after him as a way of life. But there are so many things that keep us from listening, are there not? There are so many things that keep us from listening to Jesus. Not least of which is fear, like the disciples on the mountain. They were terrified. We're scared. Where is Jesus going to lead us? I don't know, and I'm not sure whether it's going to be a safe place to go. And Jesus says, what does Jesus say if we will only listen? I am the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. Trust? Anyone have trust issues? I don't know about this Jesus. And I don't know whether or not I'm capable of doing what he says. How am I going to accomplish this? Jesus really going to be there? And Jesus says, if we will listen, I am the light of the world. I will show you the way. There's always denial. Don't want to go. Don't want to go. Don't want to go through that suffering. Don't want to go through that loss. Don't want to experience those things if that is the path that Jesus is leading me on. And Jesus says, if we will listen to him, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. Maybe it's arrogance that keeps us from listening to Jesus. I know how to do my life better than Jesus. I know better. Right? And Jesus says, if we will listen, I am the way and the truth and the life. Maybe it's just simple selfishness. I like what I got. I worked hard to get what I got, and I don't really necessarily want to give it to other people, including my time, or my talents, or my concern, or my mercy, or my love. Jesus says, if we will listen to him, I am the bread of life. You will never be hungry or thirsty. Maybe it's just divided attention. We're just so busy all the time. And Jesus says, if we will listen, I am the true vine. You are branches. And branches need pruning every once in a while so that we can pay attention. This transfiguration story is a call to affirm the ultimate truth of God's way of salvation and to live lives that are centered on that truth. This text challenges us to do what those first disciples did, to listen to Jesus and to continue following where he leads, even if they don't know where it is or how they're going to get there or whether or not they're enough to get there. This season of Lent that we are moving into with Ash Wednesday and the first Sunday of Lent next week is a time for us to renew our commitment to the spiritual disciplines that will help deepen our experience of Jesus, our relationship with Jesus, our ability to listen more carefully to Jesus every day throughout the year, especially the things that prevent us from hearing Jesus. Let us use this season, let us enter into this season of Lent, devoting ourselves to listening more carefully so that we can indeed follow more closely.